Hey out there in YouTube land, this is Kuda Slater once again. Today I kind of wanted to do a video of try to walk through designing and constructing a mech in the Mekton Zeta Plus system. Hopefully I can take some of the complex nature out of the complexity out of it, and maybe kind of make it look presentable and more comfortably for anyone who might be starting out in using the system. Let's see. But first, before we kind of start getting into that, I want to give a shout out to the Starblade Battalion Memories group. They're going to be doing a live streaming of Mekton Zeta in the the Starblade Battalion book. This is actually was one of the last books they released under the Mekton Zeta banner, and it's fairly. I thought it was a fairly good setting. It's kind of an alternative history for the original Cyberpunk 2020 series. It's good. It has some cyberware rules. It's a little bit more kind of expanded than some of the other settings that have been published under Mekton Zeta, and it's a good read. At worst, it's a good read, and I would really recommend anyone who's interested in picking up this book just for reading on its own. But anyway, I'm just giving a shout out to these guys. I'm going to be trying to follow them myself, at least to give my moral support as a fellow community member, or at least worse, give my immoral support as a fellow gamer. So, I'm going to try to have links and everything in the description down below. So now I hope that everybody has fun, and if you really want to learn about the gameplay of Mekton Zeta, this would be a good opportunity for you to follow. Anyway, oh yeah, sorry. First, I want to give kind of a bit of a warning. I'm trying to simplify this as much as possible. This is kind of the 6th attempt at trying to record this. And I keep finding more mistakes, and so I'm gonna have to be honest. There will be tangents here, where I'm gonna be running off into the weeds to try to explain something. I'm gonna try to avoid that as much as possible. So I'm gonna apologize beforehand if I may confuse you or go off into a direction that's not conductive at the time. So again, like in the old maps long ago, here be dragons, well, here be tangents. So we're going in places we don't even know where we're going. Anyway, let's see. To try to help out a little, in the Mekton archive list I maintain on Mega, there will be a link down below. I came up with some spreadsheets for people to use. This is kind of basic. There's going to be a couple of things I didn't add on this version. One of them in particular is handling weight, especially when it comes to adding fuel or calculating your flight propulsion. That's not included on here. Pretty much most everything on here is going to be it's going to give you totals for base things, and some information you're just going to have to enter manually yourself. But if your experience spreadsheets, you're more than willing to modify or do whatever you want with this version. I will have a spreadsheet of the example mecha I designed. You can use that as well. That has a few more corrections on it than this does. So, I just throw this out as a helper, or at least an aid to, let people try to get a good grip on how Mekton Zeta works. Let's see, the other version I got here. This is going to be the example mecha I designed. I'll try to go through all the different stats, what means what and such. Let's see, where do I want to start with this? Okay, first I'm going to try to break down kind of the design steps involved. First, there's at least 3 fields that you're going to go through when designing anything. First is going to be the additive level. That's basically where you buy your components, and that really determines the shape and the equipment. You have your basically structure, then your sub-assemblies, then additional support equipment. Then the next step after that is multipliers, which is the level where you add on additional things which will affect the entire mech as a whole. It's like making it quicker, making it faster, giving it some other abilities, instead of just like having it's like one particular component giving you an ability. The multiplier level will let you take that ability and apply it all to the unit itself. And the next the next level, I'm getting ahead of myself, is the scaling, which basically is kind of one of the nice parts about Mekton Zeta, is that when you finally get to an end step, you can actually use it. After you get the multiplier and everything, you can actually take it and make it bigger or smaller. It's kind of really a good way to, when you design like spaceships, large, I kind of call them large props, or equipment that's normally not, mecha and vehicles that are normally not the same scale as your basic, what you normally see in any game setting or any anime setting. The bigger and smaller, like power armor, a landmate's suit from like Appleseed. Those are smaller than your average mecha. Or you can have your I'm trying to think of a good scale. Normally, like mobile armors in Gundam would be like a 10 scale, which is 10 times bigger than your basic mobile suit, but not always the case. That's kind of a gray area we'll talk about later. But and then you can expand it out larger as a spaceship. So that's kind of one of the great utilities in the system that let you basically cover almost anything that you need. Let's see. Let's get down here. Cover some point. So wait, do I have the? Yeah, let's go to the PDF version of this. It kind of make it a little easier to follow. When you're designing anything, there are going to be at least some main important stats that you're going to want to follow, keep an eye on. I guess this would be a good time to go into this example. They kind of give make clear where we're going. Mekton Zeta is one of the big things that kind of scares people off about it when designing a thing, is that it's more of a balancing act than, say, something that's more simplified and straightforward, like in Battletech, like the old system. If you're familiar with that, Battletech is kind of one of 2 gateway drugs that get people into mecha combat or mecha fandom in general. Usually it's anime for the most part, but Battletech was a game that came out during the 80s that it was simple. It allowed you to have large-scale combat with multiple giant robots, and the rules were simple enough where you could play it on a decent-sized table and it would have a reasonably good time. But there were a lot of limitations built into it because of the need for it to be simplified, especially on the scale end. But if you're not familiar with it, In BattleTech, you normally start off with what your weight's going to be. Say it can be like 20 tons, 100 tons. Everyone always had at least a dozen 100-ton designs, because why not? But basically, when you pick your weight, you automatically know how much you can need to spend on your structure, how much you need to spend on your engine, especially when you know how, or your power plant, when you know how fast you want to make this thing go. You also know what your limitation of the armor is going to be, and then some other stuff is kind of almost always pretty set, like the cockpit, the gyroscope. It's a lot to play the game, but basically, once you pick your weight, you know what you know kind of what everything else kind of fills itself in. In Mekton, you oftentimes will, especially in the beginning when you're designing anything, kind of the way I describe it is when you first come up with your own game setting. A lot of times, when the first thing you design is going to be kind of your baseline, where you know, you decide, okay, is this going to be the bottom of the food chain? Is it going to be top of the food chain, or is it going to be kind of middle of, your ecology of how everything is going to react and interact with each other? And so it's a lot of times you kind of say, okay, this is going to be kind of maybe midline, the kind of the midline baseline. Everything's going to be either over or under. This particular example, I'm trying to think of simple ways to say it. That this baseline is going to be how everything else is going to measure to. And so a lot of times, your first unit is going to be what shapes the rest of your setting. So a lot of times you're not going to, it's going to be kind of hard to say, I want, you have your you're going to have your abstract of what you want to aim for, and eventually every now and then you kind of add that, put this together, and then like, wait, this is going to alter this and that. So there's kind of more of a balancing act in Mekton, and that kind of really comes from the fact that Mekton is an effects-driven system. It doesn't matter what your servos are, what moves your servos, what moves the entire mech, what material you're using for armor, what your weapons are. Like, are they beam weapons? Are they particle weapons? Are they firing projectile rounds? Are they flamethrowers? Are they lasers? Are they shooting bees at each other, or rocket-propelled hamsters? Is the mech being moved by steam? Is it moved by artificial muscles, hydraulics? The part doesn't matter. That's part of the story. What you need to worry about is what the kind of physical components are put together and how they interact with each other, and then further how they can interact with everything else. So there is that part kind of loses people. I'll be honest about that. That's kind of one thing that does scare a lot of people away, or at least get them to the point where they're just kind of overthink themselves to a point where they come to a standstill. Let's see, we already talked about the additive. Okay, but again, we're going to be jumping back and forth. Like I said, this is a balancing act. That's one that going to be one of the more complicated parts of this video, but after that, I'm hoping everything else will be simple. Let's see. We're talking about additive multiple scaling. There's kind of 5 sort of derivative stats you come across, or you get from when you design this system, design your unit. The first stat, is the points value. Points value, we got the main points right here. A lot of times it's point values is not exactly a good measure for a unit. You know, you could design, say, like a giant jumbo aircraft or something, and you have seats for everybody and whatnot, but when you finally get to your even though it's this giant vehicle, when you compare it to, say, like your typical mecha or a fighter craft, the point values is not going to be really good, because basically you only got so much you need for a cargo passenger plane compared to a fighter vehicle. The point values are not going to really reflect. It's like, even though it's this giant passenger plane, it still could probably be less points compared to your actual combat vehicle machine or whatever. So that kind of throws off some people, especially when you kind of overlook the fact that something like a passenger plane is going to be more like a prop. It's big dumb object. It's what everyone else interacts with, and it's not really designed to take a lot of damage. It's just there for you to interact with. It's like a big pool toy. So that's kind of one thing to keep in mind. A lot of times when you try to compare one unit to another, you kind of have to use your thumb to kind of measure things and try to compare it to each other. The other important stat that usually is derived from the design process, weight. There's some kind of things that people do overlook a lot when they're designing things. Weight. Okay, there are ways to weight basically, it kind of determines how much propulsion, how much points you need to add for get the thing off the ground, make it fly in space, or even hover. Also determines how much fuel you'll need, and of course, the more weight, the more propulsion, the more fuel. So that's kind of a vicious cycle into itself. But also, one thing people kind of overlook is that weight also determines another important stat, which is the maneuver value. The maneuver value basically is how much your character is going to struggle, or how much effort they're going to have to do to get this thing. It basically, like, say you have a character with a strength, a reflex of 6. So with this unit here, we have a -5 maneuver value, which means when they get into the cockpit and try to get this thing to do what they want, they'd be working from a reflex stat of 1. So that's just kind of how much effort they're going to have to put into to make this thing do what they want to do. There are ways to change that. You can make it. There are ways you can make it even harder for them to pilot, and of course there's a whole lot of systems that make it a lot easier to pilot. Again, this is kind of the balancing act you go through when you design anything. The other thing that kind of people overlook a lot when it comes to weight is knockback. It basically is when you get hit by something, say a weapon or a physical attack by another unit, your weight determines how badly are you knocked down from the attack, or do you stand up to it? Do you get, the lighter you are, the easier you are to push around. Of course, the heavier you are, you can shrug off at the effects of most things. That's kind of a point that some people may overlook a lot, especially when they want to get cocky and try to come up with a unit that's extremely light, but they never think about, well, what happens when the heavy hitters come out and start smacking you around. let's see, movement allowance. Of course, movement allowance right here, it's basically just determines on how much a unit can move during a given action. Here you have your ground, you have 6 MA, which is not a bad speed for a ground pounder. Then down here we have 4 MA, which is basically kind of a jump ability. Basically let you clear, hazardous or rough terrain, jump over buildings. It gives you a little bit more maneuverability on the field, but if I wanted to I can give this almost as much MA as I want. I can make it actually fly full time or whatever. Again, this is going to be kind of part of a balancing act when you're designing anything. You don't want to add something that's because it's the rule of cool or whatever. The next stat to keep in mind is the maneuver pool. Basically, this is kind of acts like a in other systems, or even in the more human scale level of combat in this game, it's kind of acts more like a luck pool. Basically, you take your piloting skill and subtract 5 from it, which is kind of the baseline. But you can modify that. I've seen it happen quite a few times, and personally I would recommend it. But say you have a character with a 6 piloting skill, you minus 5 from it, and you get 1 point. So that means you have that 1 spare point you can add to an action roll or whatever when you're in the piloting this mech. This can go further to let you do more actions if you use the Let's Activate system. Basically, there are other modifiers, particularly in the multiplier stage, where you can add more, you can increase the maneuver pool. Say like you can add enough systems that you can double or triple your how many points you have in your maneuver pool, and that can let you do more actions. So, baseline, whenever you play anything during any turn, you have at least 2 actions that you can do, and that could be either like 1 action can let you move up half of your movement allowance. You can shoot a weapon, and there are kind of ways you can play around with that. You can change weapons, you can transform. There are other actions you can do for each one. But normally you start out with 2. But okay, I think I got most of that. Hopefully I haven't lost anybody yet. So if you have any questions or anything, please feel free. I know I'm not exactly the best teacher in the world, but I want to help people the best I can. So anyway, we have kind of basically described the basics of the design process, so I'm going to try and go a little bit more deeper into it. Let's see. Now, this is kind of how I do things, and may not be the right way, but it works for me. If you come up with another way, if it works for you, then more power to you. But this is kind of how I do things. When I come up with a new setting, usually it's kind of a spark from something else. In this case, when I want to try doing, come up with my own, when I was looking around, I came across this drawing. Did I mention something? Gregory Spenos. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. I love this example I found of your work. I love it. I couldn't find a website that I could give better reference to. So I want to give credit where credit's due. This is not something I came up with. but this is something I found for inspiration, and I really appreciate the work that you put into it. If you don't recognize this, this is actually a drawing or kind of re-imaging of a Flash Man from the Starblade era of BattleTech. Basically, it was kind of a heavy mech that was kind of a competitor to the what they call the Warhammer. Basically, it's kind of heavy mech that has had at least 3 heavy lasers and 4 or 5 medium lasers to kind of give it all around capabilities. But when I was looking around for example for inspiration, I came across this, and I kind of thought of it more as it looked more like a walking pillbox or a bunker to me. I thought about it as well. In the setting idea I had, I came up with sort of a solar system wide kind of United Nations that even though they're the main power faction, there are several other minor ones, and the minor ones will often fight with themselves, and at some point either one or the other will call on the help of the United Nations to come in and bring peace. And so this is more of one of the heavy units that these forces would use to kind of bring everything to a stop. So again, like I said, I kind of looked at it and it's like, well, it looks like a mobile bunker to me. So even though I know the stats from BattleTech, I decided that these 2 large guns here would be the main weapons, and then these 4 barrels here, even though there's another barrel right there, I decided to overlook that and just call it kind of aesthetic choice. And I decided these are going to be 4 smaller weapons, and they will be not as strong as the main weapons here, but they will be able to fire in one volley by themselves. Because I decided I was going to have these have a recharge rate after they fire, so this thing will need to have other weapons to fire while it's waiting for the main guns to fire back up. Also on the shoulder here, this is a kind of like a I'm trying to remember what the original name is, but it's the self-defense turrets on a warship. I kind of decided this would be good against missiles being fired at it, or good against, let's say, personnel, people, or in most cases pedestrians that might be running around its feet. Be a good way to deal with those. And since this is kind of the UN, I envisioned as being more technically sophisticated. It would have a force field that would allow it to defend off from ranged attacks. I kind of imagine all the other minor nations having maybe cruder mecha, or even just mainly just tanks themselves. So this thing would be designed to kind of, there would be like an entire row of these things, all maintaining a line as the smaller units go through and kind of pacify everything on these main heavy units. Would be kind of closing in the circle as they try to just slowly mop up all the hostilities going on. So this thing is not really designed to move very fast. It will have some ability to jump about, kind of overcome kind of hazardous terrain, but also there's some weaknesses I kind of built into it as well. I'll try to go into those later after I explain the main features of this. So anyway, Grigori, I love your work. I hope to see more of it, and great job, because this is fantastic drawing right here. So anyway, here's the PDF version. Again, this should be on the archive. Again, links below, so you can look at it too, and also the spreadsheet as well. Here, I'm going to have to point out kind of a special case here. These are all servos that make up the unit. And as you can tell, there's a head, torso, right arm, right leg, left leg. In many cases, when someone designs a unit like this, they will also have like a backpack, and that's what they call it. You can use some of the kind of terms unapplicable, or call it something random. There's a servo chart. I'll show you that if you didn't see it earlier. Heads are kind of left a little bit nebulous on what those are. Like right here, wings and tails are kind of I'm kind of blocking that. But this is kind of a catch-all. It's not covering it up. Sorry about that. You know what? Wings and tails are basically kind of a catch-all for other components that that may fall outside of the normal humanoid form. You can use take one and use it as a backpack or wings. I think you kind of get the drift on that. Normally these are kind of more firmer structures, if you want to call it that. They actually have kills, and they can take damage and such. But then there's kind of a more lower resource investment called pods, which are basically hollow servos which don't have kills themselves or really any structure. They're kind of like a big hollow box, or what you want to call it, that just lets you, their main benefit is that they have a lot of space for the price you pay. But they if they take damage, there's really nothing for the damage from the pod itself. It's the things inside that will take the damage. So that's consideration when you're using these. So like if I was going to put a backpack on this the intercessor here, it will basically, if it ever took any damage, the armor on the pod will protect it. But if anything goes through the armor, anything that's put into the pod, like ammo or some other weapon or propulsion or whatever, that will take the damage or be in danger of taking the damage itself. But like I said, wings and tails are kind of the catch-all. Pods are this kind of cheap, or I should say inexpensive way of doing the same thing. But also the other thing about this is this unit has a lot more spaces than are normally available. Usually when you say this is a light heavy, light heavy leg, you only have 8 kills and 8 kills and 8 spaces to use to put stuff in. If I wanted, now this could be kind of a tangent, but when it comes to servos, one of the things you can do is, I can say like this light heavy unit, if I wanted to say, I'm concerned about say landmines or personnel that, trained troops that have limpet mines or something, and I want to kind of cover my angles on that, I can actually increase the kills. Even though I chose the level what I want, I get the basic 8 kills. You actually can increase that to add more kills, but normally to add 1 kill you lose about 2 spaces. Or if I wanted to, I can actually reduce the kills for whatever whatever impulse I have to want to do that. I can actually gain 2 spaces for every kill I take out. So if I dropped it down to 7, I can actually have 10 spaces. Or if I wanted to kick it up to 9, I can have 6 spaces. But also, here's another special case, though. There's a system rules called monocular construction. Basically, it means it's an additional rule that someone came up with, and if you want, I do have have it written up in the Mekton archive. Again, link down below. Basically, what it does, it increases your amount of space that you have by half. That's before you start, playing around with removing or adding kills. In this case, 8 spaces become 12. Now, I like using monocular construction because it allows me to have mechs with more high, kind of other. It's kind of worse. Kind of balances out with the maneuver values, because the price you pay is you get a reduction in cost over on your mecha. Even if you get more space, your mecha is less maneuverable because you're basically kind of the armor and structure around the mech is actually supporting the weight instead of the internal structure. So it's a rule I like to use a lot in my games, and I just find it kind of adds a lot more variety to the design process and the end results. Here we have the armor values on the unit. Again, the scale, the level of the servo will determine how much armor you can put on here. Like a light heavy would be like no wait. Let's actually look at the rules before I start pulling stuff out of the air. Okay. So light heavy servo. Normally you start out with 7, but you can increase it up to 2 levels above, so you can have as much as 9 points of armor on this thing for any light heavy servo. But in most cases I got 6 on here, kind of just to give a little bit more survivability when it's especially when it's force fields fail. But to kind of give you an understanding what these armor values actually represent, you have 6 kills here on the legs, 4 on the arms, 6 on the torso, and 4 on the head. Now, if let's just for giggles, let's say an enemy unit with a 10 kill weapon decides to actually manage to hit this thing. If it hit it in the leg, the 10 kills will hit the 6, and basically those 6 points will stop 6 kills of that 10 kill, reducing it to 4. So it means 4 kills will go on to affect the internal structure of the leg itself. So dropping it from 10 kills at 6 goes to 4, and then 4 kills will go and take out 4 kills of internal structure on this leg. There are some other modifiers you can add on to the armor. What I describe is kind of the baseline normal how it rules is, but there's a kind of a cheaper armor that's a derived, if I'm pronouncing that right. Basically, if I was going to do with that, basically it means when the 10 kills hit, it not only will those 6 kills absorb 6 kills of that attack, it means that armor is basically vaporized. So the next attack there's going to be no armor to protect it. But in the baseline normal rules for armor, the 10 kills will hit the 6, be reduced to 4, but the armor will absorb the attack and actually be reduced to 5 kills. So for the next attack, whenever that comes in. There are right here's the damage coefficient. Normally that's 1, as an example as described. There are 3 other levels, basically damage coefficient of 2, 4, and 8. Basically that means whenever you take a hit from anything that's say like the damage coefficient was 2. and a 2-kill weapon hits this section, normally what it would do is the armor would absorb the attack, but would drop down 1 point value. But if it's the damage coefficient is 2, means any weapon, any attack that does less than 2 kills, the armor will not drop down lower. Say like I shouldn't use that example. Say if I was given a coefficient of 4, say a 4-kill attack, it's not going to penetrate the 6 armor, but it's not going to, since it's, okay, I apologize. Let's get back from out the weeds. Basically, if I was to take the damage coefficient of 4 for this armor, which would be beta level described in the book, if this section was to take, say, like a 3-kill attack, it will hit, not go through, but the attack will not reduce the armor value. It won't drop down. If it was like as is here, it's just a regular coefficient of 1, a 3-kill attack will hit, be absorbed by the armor, but reduce it down to 5. I hope I actually explained that simply, other than just rambling all over. Let's see. I don't have the damage bonuses that these limbs will include due to the level, so that's kind of a mistake I made on this list. But when you do a full stat list, you'll include things like that, modifiers for level, servo size and such. Anyway, now this is kind of where the fun part usually begins. These are the different weapons that are offensive and defensive systems that are built into this unit. You have the main cannon, which are these guns here, as I imagine them. I was going to call them particle cannons, but I couldn't fit that in the space that I had. But the other weapons are referred to as scribblers. That was kind of inspired from Cyberpunk Cyber Generation books. It was a kind of a additional module to the original Cyberpunk game. Again, rather interesting. They kind of more oriented to younger player characters. As a interesting nanovirus is suddenly released and starts changing everything, basically kind of turning kids into kind of mutants, giving them social abilities and such. But I digress. Scribblers were one of the names of the weapons they add into. It's basically kind of a low power weapon, but it has a high volume of fire, and even though it's pretty low kill, it kind of scribbles all over a target, trying to reduce the armor by multiple hits instead of just one solid hit. So that's kind of why I call it that. I just kind of figure, it's I just like the name for the concept. And then here's the defensive turret on the shoulder, this little guy up here. And then this is another special case to point out. This is actually placed not in the servo itself, but on what's called a weapon mount. It's kind of like imagine like a hand that can hold something that you can put that weapon mount on almost any other servo. Pods, you can't really do that, but it's a weapon mount kind of gives you a little bit more versatility in designing things and placing such. But the drawback is it's kind of like, say, imagine I have a hand on my shoulder, it's holding the gun, but any attacks that hit the torso can actually hit the turret, the little defense turret, and attack it without the turret getting any kind of armor protection from the servo, as if it was originally built into the torso itself. It has 2 different types of ammo that I can draw from. Then down here is the force field, which is kind of another special case I'm going to have to describe. Because what I did was I used something called an energy pool, which basically is basically kind of like it's more like a Swiss Army knife for designing weapons with. It's a little bit more complicated than normally put into a shield, but I wanted to design a shield that had 2 different modes of operation. I'll try to explain that in a little bit. Let's see where. And right here we have your supportive weapon systems. Here's the weapon mount I talked about. It has 3 spotlights built into it, which means it can illuminate 3 hexes in front of it. For like if it's a dark cave or something, it allows the pilot to see things. The ejection seat, which gives it a bonus for in case the unit takes up so much damage the pilot needs to eject. That should be pretty self-explanatory. But the cockpit I put into the torso because that's normally where I like to put it. And links. Links is kind of one of the important things when it comes to weapons, especially if you have like limited amount of turns. Actions in a turn. The way I kind of linked everything is I took 1 scribbler in each arm and linked it to the main cannon so that they can actually fire both of those as one action in a different direction if it wanted to, or it can actually fire all the weapons together as one action at one target. That's kind of one way to get more bang for your buck if you're using limited amount of actions per turn. Let's see. Well, I guess I'll go and try to explain some of the details here. Okay, in the main cannon, we have 8 kills of damage. In most cases, that means it's going to give out 8 kills, and if it takes any damage, it takes about 8 kills to take it out altogether. The +1 accuracy bonus, that's pretty much a default characteristic of any kind of beam weapon when using those rules. You can raise or lower if you wanted to. That's always an option. Range, you can, when you buy a you kind of pass it. Right here, when I chose to pick 8 kills, I had to pay an initial cost of 12, but I get an initial value of 11 hexes for range. That's not the entire range that it's capable of. That's kind of what they refer to as the effective range. The maximum range that this thing can actually fire, when it starts out as 11, is a square of its range, which is 121 in this case. But on the as I designed it, it's 14, so that means its maximum range is 196. In the 14 hex range, it means it has, doesn't really have difficulty or anything firing or hitting anything. But once you go past that 14, it's going to have a little more difficulty targeting and getting a good hit on anything. And then the final detail about as I put in this weapon is the warm-up time. Basically means it's every time it fires, it's going to have to wait a turn to charge up and be ready to fire again. Now on the scribblers, I had set their the design process is pretty similar to the main cannon, but I started with a kill value of 2, kept the original accuracy, but then kept the original range of 6. This means it's the maximum range on it's 36. It's really more of a close-in weapon. Kind of give it an alternative to keep itself protected or attacking another target as its main cannons power up. And then here is what's referred to as the burst value. This, if you don't know, this basically means when a weapon has a burst value, it means it's when it fires, it's actually firing that many times in one turn. When you make your hit roll, if for every level, for every point that you score over your target, you hit it another time. In this case, burst value 3 means at most this weapon, for every action it's used, or every time it's fired, there's a maximum of 3 hits that that one weapon can do. But since all 4 of these are linked together, they can be fired as one attack, and there's a good possibility that you can get as many as 12 hits as of one volley of hitting a target. Now, since it's linked and not what's referred to as cross-link, it means that the location of it hitting is going to be random. They're not all going to hit the same location, which, if you haven't figured that part out yet, if they all were able to hit one location, that's a very big owie. But here, since they're all just linked normal, that means basically they're going to be hitting random locations all over, up to 4 to 12 times, and basically it's designed really just to strip the armor off of a tougher unit. Okay, the defensive turret is a projectile weapon, which means it actually fires a physical round instead of using lasers. I did that just kind of give it a little bit, something different to play with. I kind of saw this weapon as being used more for as an anti-missile weapon in case its shields ever were taken out. Also used against infantry or my favorite target, pedestrians. Let's see, has 33 rounds standard ammunition. Basically, it hits something, it does damage. That's particularly good when it's used against missiles. Here you see it has a burst value as well. It has a burst value of 4, unlike the Scribblers, which have a burst value of 3. That means it can hit into a group, infantry person or a group of infantry about 4 times, or you can take out up to 4 missiles, since it has what's called the Phalanx ability, which is it lets it shoot down missiles. And AP here means it's anti-personnel. I also gave it 16 rounds of incendiary shots to kind of basically start fires or set fire to pedestrians. You can see where I like to go. The incendiary rounds, not really designed to take attack mechs, but it's can help start fires and again, anti-personnel. Here we have the sensors. These are another additive system. Basically, they're in this kind of same levels as servos. At the higher level sensors you use, you can pick up more kills. You can pick up more range for your sensors. Unfortunately, because the way the spreadsheet is formed or formatted, I can't not really add the comm range. So there's a sensor and there's a communication range, and every level you go up higher, you can go get longer range for your sensors, longer range for your communications, more kills for how much damage they can take. Sensor range is important because that's the range where you can actually use your weapons in. You can have longer sensor range than you want, then your weapons can hit, but if your sensor range is less than your actual weapon range, you're going to have problems. Let's see, here we have the propulsion system. I used regular thrusters, which is kind of the default description for flight systems. There are others. There's like a kind of a hovercraft system called GES, ground effect system. Basically, if I went with that, it means the mech would just hover over its spot, or can just zip about on a cushion of air like a hovercraft, but it won't really be able to jump over everything. The thrusters here actually allow it to jump high over targets. One kind of design feature I've seen other people doing, and I kind of do it myself, is normally when you figure out how many points you need to spend on flight systems, you kind of pay a big block of points, and a lot of people just kind of throw it in one location. What I try to do is actually try to break down how many points each point of movement goes for, and kind of break it down so that instead of being like, say, one blob of points that I have in a servo that gives me 4 MA, I break it down into 4 different parts that each one giving me 1 movement point. So in case one gets hit, I don't lose everything all in one go. It's like if you ever look at an A-10 Warthog, you notice how basically all the parts, wings and tail fin and engines are all kind of spread out in their own separate things. That can be applicable here too, if you break down certain systems so that they're spread about and you don't have to worry so much about losing. You take a hit and lose a system, you're not crippled that badly. Okay, a lot of those were the additive systems. Now I'm going to talk about the multiplier systems. The multiplier section is right here on the spreadsheet. Right here in the first line is the power plant. I just kind of went with the default, assuming it's a fusion nuclear reactor, because that's what you normally see in anime or most games. But this is, instead of a regular normal in a power plant, this has actually been supercharged, which means it can actually walk faster, it actually be a little bit more maneuverable, and if I want it to be kind of another special detail, if I want it to be what they call hot or cool, I can get additional modifiers. Cool basically means it's not that volatile, it will continue to put power out, but if you go hot, that means it's kind of you take out some limiters on it and you can get more performance out of it, but if you take any damage, you risk the possibility of the whole thing exploding. With a cool power plant, you have more of survivability, and not one hit you're toast. Environmental systems here. These are basically protections for the elements. Basically like desert or Arctic, as in here, means it can function in extremely cold environments or even extreme hot sandy environments without suffering too many effects from that. ACE is another multiplier system. Again, remember, a multiplier affects the entire unit as a whole instead of having these little bits and pieces that only give you like one special effect. The multiplier systems will give the covered effect over the entire unit. ACE lets you increase your maneuver pool. As I was talking about earlier, this will help increase the amount of points you're using to either use as additional bonuses for special roles if you're trying to perform something difficult, or it lets you expand the number of actions per turn. And here, last line is the monocular kill construction, which I talked about earlier, that basically gives you more space but makes you less maneuverable. Again, that's kind of one of my favorite rules to use. Let's see. That should cover pretty much everything. Okay, now I'm going to kind of do a light cover over how do you figure out your final cost and everything. So all of this, your servos, weapons, supportive equipment, sensors, communications, flight propulsions, those are all your additive systems. There are some other additives you can use, but these are generally the basic ones most people normally use. These are all, you just basically total them all up, and then you get your base count right here. The other thing you need to do is to add up all your kills. You have your servos, then you have your armor, damage that your weapons can take before they're disabled, Some support equipment will have kills that they take. Sensors and communications, they have their own set of kills. You add all those up, and you get, in this case here, add them all up, you get 57.5 tons. So, basically, to explain that, you take all your kills and divide that by 2, because for every ton that your mecha weighs, default is 2 kills per ton. Now, this is a point where you can change that if you're the game master. Again, if you're going to do that, you need to be consistent and have that apply to all units, not just it being like just one faction or anything. That's a very important issue. Game balance you need to worry about, or keep an eye on at least, not let it get too crazy. But normally 2 kills per ton. So we add all the kills each servo, all the armor, every weapon can take before they're destroyed, all supportive systems, and then divide that by 2. And again, in this case, you get 57.5 tons. Now, the propulsion system, like I've said earlier, and again, this is going to be an example of the balancing. This is going to be one of the first steps you hit when you're going to go back and look over everything and start balancing things. Because the next thing that we haven't included in our piecing everything together is the fuel. Fuel is normally like 1% of your weight per every 100 kilometers of range that you want to give it for flight. In this case, I decided I wanted to have 200 kilometers worth of jumps that it can make. How many jumps that's going to be? I don't want to do any more math. I'm going to embarrass myself now, aren't I? Where's your mouse? There he is, the mouse. Basically, every kilometer is 20 hexes, because each hex is 50 meters across. So 20 times 200, 4,000 hexes. So it means we have about 1,000 jumps. So we don't have to, he doesn't have to worry too much about jumping, or making sure that every jump counts. So he can, he doesn't worry too much about it. But that's basically 2% of its weight, which kicks up to 58.14 tons. So this is the weight right here that I would use to figure out what my flight propulsion will take. And I can't get that because I'm wrong screen. Just for giggles, I'll show you. Oops, there we go. This is kind of how you figure out how many points you need to spend on flight propulsion. Each system here, each of these 4 different systems give you a propulsion that's a movement that's not walking, basically. That's not a ground-based movement. GES is basically a kind of a hovercraft system. It consumes fuel. Hydrojets are for water movement. They don't consume fuel. You should just run off your reactor or power plant. Thrusters will use fuel, and they actually grant flight. GES only lets you hover just above the ground. It doesn't let you go over objects and such. At least I don't remember where it does. And then the Gravitex is just kind of a much more advanced system. It doesn't use fuel. It it's almost like magic levitation. There's a technological magic levitation. You can use it to describe like a nuclear thruster or something, or in other settings. So basically, the main claim to fame is just much more advanced and doesn't consume fuel. But thrusters are kind of the default. It can describe propellers on like a World War II aircraft, helicopter blades. that case, that can be a little different. But it will basically, you choose what system you want and how many movement points you want to assign to it, and basically you kind of plug in your weight here with fuel. I always keep remember that. Then multiply 0.05 per 1 MA, or I kind of like to use, since I use a scientific calculator most of the time, I like to just enter the whole formula right here. Kind of an easy way to think of this: for every 8, you don't have to worry about like this value being 1. Or if it's 16, it's 2. This kind of part looks a little daunting at times, but especially in the beginning. But it's very easy. Let's see, where was I? So anyway, again, that's like I said, when I design something, I like to break things down for a little more durability or survivability. So I kind of figured out what, for every point of movement I was going to give it a jump, I just located the cost right here. Ooh, I just realized something I had to overload. When you are designing something that has a lot of variables to it, like in case of weapons, when you design, you figure first you figure out your cost of everything, starting at your base and all the modifiers, then you get your final cost. Like in the back out in the weeds again. There we go. In the case here, when I started on the weapon, the main cannon on this the intercessor, I started with a basic kill of 8, which means I start out with 12 points. This means it's 12 points before I start changing anything. You get your base range, and then from there you can start changing things. I increased the range by 25%, and then warm-up time. Let's see, with increasing the range, I increased the cost of the gun, but when I added the warm-up time, I actually kind of decreased it by 10%. And so that I put that in a calculator. So we kind of just walk you through here. So we got a base of 12. Wrong screen, geez. 12 times 0.1, 12 times 0.9 for the warm-up. That means the base cost, after all these modifiers going up and down, is 12.096. Now, this may mean nothing right now to you, but what that means, this is the cost of the weapon, but this also determines how much space it takes. So let's shut you down. In the case here, we have heavy striker arms, which means I only have 8 spaces. I'm sorry, 9 spaces. So somehow I can figure out how to cram just a little over 12.1 points into 9 spaces, and there's a way to do that. You can spend half a point and take off a full space off this. So if I spend, like, say, half a point right now, I can increase this to 12.596, but it only takes 11 spaces. And in this case, I include how much space each weapon was eventually reduced to. In this case, since I only had 9 spaces, and had scribblers, and it's 1 scribbler in each arm, I gave half of the space in the arm to each weapon. So in this case, I made the main cannon reduced down from 12 points here down to 4.5. So I had spent, again, 0.5. Which came out to 15.894 as a total cost for that weapon. Now it means it fits in that one little space, and I can, I got more bang than I could normally cram into one spot. And I did the same thing with scribblers, because they're 6, I think it was 6 points or something. But I kind of shrunk them down so that both of them can sit pretty with each other, and not be nudging each other out of the way. The some special cases of systems like that, the sensors and comms, normally they have a set amount of space they take up depending on their level. Most cases it's 1, sometimes I think they might go up as much as 2. But the other kind of problem you often have is locating things to different locations, particularly when you're using a lot of flight propulsion, is trying to cram every movement point in every location you can. You're not just to you can try to put it in one spot, but it's one spot that's going to take a lot of space by itself. And that's kind of one of the reasons why it's good to spread them about, not just for survivability, but also to let you not have to spend more points than you need to get it to fit in one location. Now, let's see, we talk about multipliers. I just realized there's a good example here of such a issue as cramming something into a small space. The force field here. Now, this is kind of something, a special piece of equipment I need to go a little more description about. Force fields act a little bit differently than armor. In this case here, in the first mode, it normally it will block an attack of 7 kills or lower, and it's a force field to do that multiple times without losing any strength or being knocked down. Now, the one additional modifiers we'll add on this is that it will only block physical attacks, but it will also it's been modified even further in that it will only block physical ranged attacks. So that means if there's a tank that fires a shell at it, the force field will block it, and as long as it's not over 7 kills and damage, it will block that and blocking additional ones. But if it were to take a 8 kill attack, it will absorb 7 kills, be knocked down, and 1 kill of damage will go on to hit the mech itself. The reset value here is how many turns it takes for it to come back up after being knocked down. The other thing is, in this mode, if it were to take a damage that's more than double 7 kills, say in this case, like it took 15, it will be completely wiped out. In this case, a game master may want to make a call on this, because the way I designed this here, using instead of one energy force field, I used a device that can be used as 2 different modes of a force field. If this mode gets knocked out, I normally would rule that it will take out all the other functionality out of that particular energy pool. Again, think of an energy pool as a Swiss Army knife. It can basically be used as a energy ranged weapon or energy melee weapon, force field. I've actually had some cases where I used it as a additional for flight propulsion, like using it as gravitatics. But again, a game master may want to make a call if they're going to use this. If one mode gets knocked out, both modes are no longer there, or you can sort of say that side of the energy pool has been taken out. I think there might be some other rules that may counter that, but again, game master's rules. The next mode here is instead of going for 7 kills, you know, like if you're expecting like lighter range hostilities, if you're expecting something much heavier or such, you can kick in the higher mode, and you can absorb 11 kills attacks and not be knocked down. But the disadvantage I added to this is that if it actually takes like 12 kills, it will take 2 turns for it to come back online. But the nice thing is that it'll take like 23 kills to actually take this mode out altogether. I hope I didn't lose you on that. But yeah, that's kind of one of the other fun part of the balancing act you do when you go back and forth is when you design a subsystem like a weapon, particularly weapons or flight systems, you oftentimes will have to figure out how you can locate space to have that be able to carry that system. Back again, I'm sorry about the tangent. Back here again, you have your base cost, which is the subtotal of all the additive systems together. You have your fuel doesn't really cost you anything except for weight. There are some other subsystems you can add, like what's called command armor, which lets you kind of bolt on additional pieces to your unit that could be ejected later on. There are boosters. There's some other things you can add on too, but I don't want to get too crazy with this right now. So you have your base cost of all the point values of everything you spend together. Then you have the subtotal of how many kills your machine's carrying, and that determines your weight. Now with multipliers, as the name tells, these values right here actually increase the cost, or even increase or decrease cost. It can Monte Carlo construction actually will decrease your cost. So in this case, we had the additional supercharged power plant increases your cost by 30% on your additive list. Environmental increases those two together normally are 5% each. Together they increase you by 10. The ACE for just regular 100% increase in your movable is 0.2. So, and then of course, increases by 20%, and then Monte Carlo decreases by 20%. So you wind up with increasing your value by 40%. I added one right here to make it simple in the formulas. So that means right down here, your final value to increase your cost is increasing you by 140%. So right here is the values, the 862 and a quarter, some change, as multipliers. Now, here's another point where you get into the balancing act. If you get through all this point and you derive your stats and add up all your modifiers, if you're not happy with the weight, this is where you spend like 2 points per ton that you want to lose. And so at the multipliers, you add that to here, and this is where you get your final cost. Now, if I was going to make this into a much bigger unit, say like literally as a walking bunker, it's like make it scale 10, scale 100, like scale 10 for small ship or mobile armor, 100% for like a starship. I would include the additional cost right here, which can be like 25. I think it's 25 times for regular scale 10, and like 1,000, 5,000, something like that for scale 100. And there are modifiers for scaling because material doesn't scale up as, like, especially armor doesn't scale up it's like a, I don't want to get too much more math than this, but basically when you increase the size of something, the surface area changes, the mass density changes, so they include rules for that to balance that out as well. But anyway, that's kind of the gist of the design construction process. Again, you have your additive systems up here, which are your various subsystems. Think of it as the effect is only caused by one piece. And then when you get into the multiplier stage, that is where the systems that are added affect the mecha as a whole. And then when you get to your third stage, which I don't really have described out here, we talked about verbally, it changes the characteristics and everything even further from there. So that's the that's kind of the gist of everything. Now, I might go into a little criticism of the design. Again, normally originally when I first thought of like the idea of the setting this would be as a kind of a solar system wide United Nations that would interfere in hostilities between minor nations, and basically when one side we can't take any longer, or the other side won't capitulate or stop hostilities, the United Nations will come in and let's call it United Planets will come in and basically put smack down on those that are still hostile. So this is mainly kind of a heavy, not meant for rapid deployment, but mainly as to hold the line and basically control the area and bring at work together as a group, as a line of offense or defense, and kind of help encroach on the hostile parties and just kind of make their little piece of the world shrink further and further until they either wise up and surrender or just wiped out. So it's not going to be particularly fast, even though it has a 6 movement for ground. It has 4 MA for jumping over like large objects and such, like buildings. I kind of thought more of the old urban mech from Battletech days. Kind of similar thing. It's not really designed to jump over if there's a building in the way, either walk around it or try to jump over it, or even just crash through it. The weight as base, this is a knockback table. It still can be affected. It won't. It's not heavy. If I originally was concerned about knockback, I would make this a little heavier. Maybe increase it to above 60 tons, so that it can shrug off more damage, or damage effects, I should say. It won't be knocked down as much, or maybe slow down or lose actions because of it got stunned. With the force field as it is, I could imagine this being sort of a bully on the battlefield, where the enemy will have these less sophisticated units like tanks or maybe crude or mecha still firing physical rounds like missiles or railguns and such, and the force field is designed mainly to be channeled depending on how much damage those physical weapons are doing. To actually take out this unit, if I was to be the enemy, I would actually set up landmines in its way, or have troops come up with limpet mines to try to attack. Since they're a smaller target, they actually will get a bonus for attacking a much larger target. So you can bypass armor with limpet mines or landmines, and cut and cause it to fall down. The other thing would be is if somehow, like my additional kind of idea on the setting for this would have been the United Planets are coming in and try to pacify these two minor nations or more, whatever, on a particular planet or even space colonies. And during the attack, a new alien force or some other new faction comes in, like if you haven't seen Genlock from Rooster Teeth Animation, basically they're fighting an evil faction that came from nowhere and is slowly taking over large sections of the planet Earth to control and slowly expanding their part of the territory. So I kind of designed this to be sort of a bully to the cruder minor nation forces, but then when a alien force comes in with actual high-powered ancient weapons, tables will quickly turn on it, or people are going to realize that the tables have definitely turned. Let's see. Or another way to take this unit out would be if you got something that's faster and more designed for melee weapons, say like a ninja, or even like a praying mantis, kind of like fast enough to close in where this guy may not be able to target as quickly or even ambush it from behind. Get in real close where the force fields are not protected and try to defeat its armor directly with armor-piercing attacks, or being like if you're infantry or something, you can get bonuses for bypassing armor and such. Let's see. See how else what I want to do with this. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. Again, this would be the first unit I designed for this game setting that I was thinking about. Additional units I would come up with, like something smaller that would be able to move faster, and maybe be able to move faster within the circle or the area that the offensive line these guys would form as a group. Something small that can run around or even run outside behind the lines to plug any breaches that may occur. Or even I even had no, I don't have that picture. There was another picture someone drew of this beautiful Atlas mech from BattleTech that I thought I would make it. Just gorgeous, super heavy assault unit to back up these guys. Unfortunately, I don't seem to have that picture with me right now, but yeah, that would be kind of how, as I was saying earlier, when you're designing your setting, you start with a baseline and then build your so-called ecology, gaming ecology all around that. That's about the best suggestion I could really make for when you design something more than just this one unit fits all type setting. You actually have different types of units. Just find where you want your baseline to be, get that conceptualized, then design the first unit to be that baseline, balance everything out, and then you can kind of move away from there. Again, if the rules in Mekton are adjustable, you can modify them, but the important thing you need to always keep in mind is try to keep it balanced. Because if you say you have one faction that has 2 kills per ton and a alternative faction has 4 kills per ton, that's not really, and that's going to throw your balance right off right there, and that's going to cost. You may want to give your players a challenge to fight around, But on the other hand, I wouldn't recommend doing things like that. Like another thing is like in my Noah setting, I changed the speed per turn, or how much time each turn lasted. From 10 seconds, I changed it down to 5, and that means things are basically moving around much quicker, but it also changes the speeds of what everything's moving at. I mean, again, Mekton Zeta lets you do almost anything, but it has its greatest strength, but the greatest weakness it has is that it lets you do anything, and it's very hard, very easy, to lose control of that, especially if you're not the only one that's designing or building stuff for this setting. Anyway, that's again, I'm sorry if I rambled too much any particular time. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below. Please keep it constructive, because my goal in doing this, I want people to be able to have fun and use this system and enjoy it as much as I do. So again, keep questions or comments constructive. I'll try to answer everything as best I can, or worst case, I will even try to sit down and do another lengthy. Good Lord, it's how long it's been? I'd be surprised y'all might not fall asleep in yet. But anyway, this is Kuda Slayer. You have your questions, keep it constructive, ask away, and I'll be doing some more videos of how to convert other anime franchises or other settings to Mekton Zeta. If you have any particular ones you may want to suggest, right now on the table I have Battletech, which I probably eventually will do. Another one would be Pacific Rim or Neon Genesis Evangelion, which I'm kind of looking forward to doing those. I will be doing one on Gundam. Since what I would do in Gundams would be the same thing I would do in Noah, that's going to be kind of may have to be a twofer right there. So I'm kind of trying to decide how I want to handle that. But Maricross will probably be Maricross Robotech will be probably one I'll do again, another one later. But that's kind of what I have on the table right now. So if you have any other suggestions, questions, again, please keep it constructive, and I'll see you all next time.